Hi, I'm Talia Newland. Today I'm going to talk about Rigpa's renewed apology and how it stacks up against the 4 powers of confession of the Tibetan Buddhist teachings on Vajrasattva practice. I'm going to start by quoting from the Tibetan Buddhist teachings from the words of my perfect teacher, one of Rigpa's most revered texts. Then I'm going to look at Rigpa's renewed apology that they put out last month. I'm going to have a look and see how it stacks up against the requirements of the teachings. And then I'm going to point out what further steps they need to take before they've made a categorical apology. Now let me start by saying this renewed apology is a step in the right direction. It really is in some respects a major step forward. That it falls rather short is not really surprising because it's taking Rigpa a long time to get to the point where they realise what is actually required. I just want to emphasise that it's really important for Rigpa that they get it right. It's important for them. They might think they're doing this for Sogyal's victims, and yes, of course they are, but it's actually vital for them that they get it right. I'm talking about in terms of their revered teachings. So let's have a look at the words of my perfect teacher. So these 4 powers of confession are a major part of the healing practice of Vajrasattva, which is a major practice for the Rigpa Sangha. And without these 4 powers of confession, you can't heal. That's in the teachings. So these 4 powers are vital. So the first of the 4 powers of confession is the power of support. Now that refers in the practice to giving your confession to the deity Vajrasattva, but as it says here, in other cases the support would be the particular object to which you address your confession. So that might also mean, and in this case would mean, the people that Sogyal and Rigpa have actually harmed. So that's the power of support. Your apology, your confession has to get to the people that you've harmed. The second is the power of regret, and I'll just read this to you. The power of regret comes from a feeling of remorse for all the negative actions you've done in the past. There can be no purification if you do not see your misdeeds as something wrong and confess them with fierce regret without concealing anything. In other words, it has to be a detailed confession. You have to be quite specific about what you've done wrong, and you have to know that it's wrong. So the regret is really genuinely about what you did wrong. The third is the power of resolution. Now this is resolving never to commit these negative actions again. Okay, that's obvious. Then the power of action as an antidote. Now in the practice it's got to do with reciting a whole lot of mantras and visualizations, but the general teaching here is this power involves accomplishing as many positive actions as you can as an antidote to your past negative actions. So those are the 4 powers which from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view you would need to have in your apology in order for you to successfully do the practice of healing. Rigpa's renewed apology, they say it's from the vision board, the Rigpa boards, management teams and main teachers. And that's who's giving the apology, and they're reaching out to the Rigpa Sangha past and present and to the wider Dharma community. And they say they have a deep and heartfelt wish to make amends for mistakes that have been made and harm that has been caused. Now, I'm going to come back to that because I want to start on a positive note, which is actually paragraph 3 of the Rigpa apology. Because here, they've made quite a major step forward by saying, we acknowledge that our handling of the situation over recent years has caused further hurt for people within our community and outside. We are aware that even though we made the changes that needed to happen in our community and organisation, often we did not manage to communicate how much we felt for those who were hurt. Our sincere intentions did not come through. So this is great. They've actually admitted that they've handled it badly. Great move, great step forward. The fact that they say the changes that needed to happen is a little bit because we haven't quite made all the changes that needed to happen, but you know, they have made some effort there. So they've recognised that, yeah, they've handled it badly, and that bad handling has in itself caused harm or hurt, as they say. And they admit that they haven't managed to communicate. Now, they're still not communicating, because honestly, if they had run this apology by anyone in the What Now group, could have told them where it fell short. But it appears that they're not actually really ready to communicate quite in the way where they would actually have to listen to something that they don't want to hear. So if you're going to turn off this video now, that's you. No, honestly, this is a step in the right direction, and it's great that they've tried. Now, we know why it's happened, and they actually admit that. They say this renewed apology was shared as part of a restorative justice process. The thing is that nobody wanted to have anything to do with the restorative justice process that they were crowing about, that they'd set in motion, because they hadn't admitted that any crime had occurred. And you can't have any restorative justice without someone admitting that they have actually committed a crime. This has only really happened because everyone said, well, sorry, we can't participate in your restorative justice because we don't have a proper apology. If you have a look at Sandra Paula's blog post on this, you'll see that she hasn't accepted the apology, and she pretty much sums up why nobody else is going to be accepting it either. Not when they read it closely. So if we look at this in terms of the power of support, in terms of actually saying the apology to the people that need to hear it, they've made an effort this time in that they did send emails directly to some people who were directly hurt. They also missed out some people. They could have, though, got onto me and said, could you publish this on your blog? Then it would have got to a whole community of people who were abused, or know people who were abused, and the information would have got out at the time that they actually made this renewed apology. So again, there's some attempt there to get the apology in front of the people who need it, but they just didn't quite go far enough to make sure that everyone heard it. So the real issue we have here in terms of the 4 powers of confession is the power of regret. Because even though they say our sincere intentions didn't come through, we acknowledge our handling of the situation caused further hurt, although they say that they have a deep and heartfelt wish to make amends for mistakes, they haven't been specific in what they're actually apologising for, apart from the bit that I just read you about their handling of the situation. But the main issue here is abuse, and the word abuse is nowhere to be seen. So we have a look here at the end of paragraph 1, where they say they have a deep and heartfelt wish to make amends for mistakes that have been made and harm that has been caused. Now, that's called passive voice. That's a sentence construction where you don't have a subject to the sentence. You only have an action and an object. Now, what that means is you're not saying who did the action. There's nothing to say who made the mistakes or who caused the harm. Okay, so for so long as Rigpa uses the passive voice construction in their apologies, it's not going to wash, because they're not admitting here that Sogil abused anyone. If you were to get rid of the passive voice and to actually put an agency for these mistakes and harm there, you would have something like this. With a deep and heartfelt wish to make amends for the mistakes that we have made and the harm that Sogil Rinpoche has caused. You see, you put a subject in there, you put a doer. You admit that Sogil harmed people. That is just key. Now, that's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 says, we acknowledges that people were hurt. Now, that is much better than felt hurt. And I think this is probably quite a major step for them to actually admit that people were hurt rather than that they just felt hurt. Because the language that they've been using up until now in their so-called apologies is that people felt hurt or people experienced hurt. So we have to give them a bit of a tick here for one step in the right direction. However, They haven't admitted who hurt them. We acknowledge that people were hurt. Again, passive voice. Who hurt them? We acknowledge that people were hurt in their relationship with Sogyal Rinpoche. So they've mentioned Sogyal, but they haven't said were hurt by Sogyal Rinpoche. No, they said were hurt in their relationship with Sogyal Rinpoche. Now, what does that mean? That is a really weird way of putting it. And if you unpack that, in there is Rigpa holding on to this idea that there was something wrong in the relationship. Now, the relationship, if you talk about relationship, you're talking about two people. Right? They're saying something's gone wrong in that relationship. That's putting some of the onus onto the student for that relationship. But we're talking here about a student-teacher relationship, and there are reasons why in the Western world teachers are not supposed to have sex with their students, because there's a power imbalance. So it's never an equal relationship. So you can't put onus onto the student for what's gone wrong in that relationship. They shouldn't have used the word relationship at all, because the issue is not with the relationship. The issue is that Sogyal Rinpoche stroke Laka abused these people. And until Rigpa admits that, their apology is just not good enough. This is the point where they need to say, we acknowledge the findings of the Lewis-Silkin report. We admit that these things did occur. We recognise that Sogyal Rinpoche did physically, emotionally, sexually, even financially abuse people. We admit that that is wrong, and we are very sorry that we enabled this behaviour and covered it up. That's what they need to be apologizing for. They need the word abuse in there. Without it, it's an incredible downplay. It's a whitewash. It's glossing over the actual horrific facts of the matter. I mean, we're talking here about people being hit so that they're bleeding. We're talking here about people being knocked unconscious. We're talking about people whose ear is ripped off of their body and it's bleeding. This is not just, This is not just hurt in their relationship with Sogyal Rinpoche. This is out and out abuse. And then there's all these young women who were coerced into giving sexual favours to Sogyal Rinpoche. That they didn't want to do it. They were coerced into it. And even those who maybe thought they did want to do it were only doing it because they'd been manipulated by these teachings that told them that if they did these things, it would speed their path to enlightenment. I mean, seriously? They acknowledged that Rigpa failed to respond appropriately to their needs. Now, what exactly does that mean? In what way does Rigpa see them responding appropriately to this? And if we have a look at the blog post that went along with this renewed apology, we get some more idea of what they mean by failing to respond appropriately. It says here, we've come to terms with the fact that as a community we should have supported people much more in their relationship with Sogyal Rinpoche. Now, when you're on the inside, you know what's meant by the term support for people in their relationship. What that actually means is you get to talk to a senior instructor who will tell you that this is crazy wisdom. They will give you all of the beliefs that have already been used to coerce you into this situation. They will just give that to you again. The other part that I know of what Rigpa means by support in your relationship with Sogyal is that when people complained that they felt that they were being abused by Sogyal, they were sent to Rigpa therapists. These were people with actual counselling and therapy qualifications, and they abused their professional ethics by putting this angle onto the people that they were supposedly counselling. And I know this for sure because I know people who actually went through this counselling process, and basically all it was another way to say the same thing. The Rigpa party line, that this that you see as abuse is not abuse, it's a teaching for you. So if that's what they mean by this support, it's not good enough. And Rigpa needs to think about what the appropriate behaviour actually would have been. Like stopping enabling it. So acknowledging that people were hurt in their relationship with Sogyal Rinpoche is a gross understatement. It's insulting that you could put the kinds of things that Sogyal did into this label, were hurt in their relationship with Sogyal Rinpoche. They haven't even managed to say that Sogyal Rinpoche hurt people. Where can we really begin in a restorative justice process if they can't say Sogyal Rinpoche did abuse people and we are sorry that we enabled and covered it up? Until it's in there, we haven't got the power of regret, because it was quite clear in what I read you before that you can't leave anything out. It has to be specific, it has to be precise, and you have to know that it was wrong. Not this remaining idea that somehow or other it was the perception of the abused person that it was abuse. No, it was actually abuse. If you really want to have the power of regret here, fully and completely, you have to admit that Sogyal Rinpoche abused people. And you have to be specific about that abuse. Physical, emotional, sexual, psychological, financial and spiritual abuse. So now we have the power of resolving to not do it again. Now in this apology they do say that we apologise this and continue to take action to ensure this never occurs again. So though they have an attempt here to abide by the third and the fourth powers of confession, of making sure it never occurs again and taking action, they're falling short still. But this is another attempt to get there. They're saying that they're continuing to learn from the situation and actively make changes, both cultural and practical, including creating a safe environment in Rigpa. They put out a code of conduct because the Charity Commission in the UK needed it in order for them to continue with their charity status. However, this code of conduct, which they refer to all the time as an indication of the changes that they've made, have this shared values and guidelines for the Rigpa community document that goes with it. And even though I've been told the main code of conduct covers everything, we have in this shared values and guidelines document something that goes against that really strongly. It's under the heading Entering the Vajrayana Path. They say that those who want to study the Vajrayana and Dzogchen teachings can only do so by making a formal request for this level of spiritual guidance. They will receive teachings on the ethics and commitments specific to Vajrayana and Dzogchen. In other words, there's a whole nother category of ethics and commitments for Vajrayana and Dzogchen. So this is saying this is not covered in the Code of Conduct itself. And you'll see this in Dzongsa Khyentse's books. He'll wax on about how, for an ordinary student, what do they call it? The general Buddhist teacher, abuse is inappropriate. And then he'll go, as soon as, however, you get into the Vajrayana and Dzogchen, it's totally appropriate. Not only is it appropriate, he says, but you can't even see it as abuse. And here it is. It's actually encoded in their code of conduct. And yet they say they've made the changes, but here it is. They say such a formal request should only come after discussion with experienced instructors. Well, I've already told you what happens when you have these discussions with experienced instructors. You're going to get the teachings in this book, which pretty much tell you that you have to be a slave to your teacher. What about this one? Such formal requests are completely optional and voluntary, lovely, and when made by a student, constitute consent to this level of spiritual guidance. So because they see sucking Sogyal's dick as spiritual guidance, then once you have actually formally requested this kind of spiritual guidance, you're supposed to see that as spiritual guidance. And you will be told Well, you've given your consent. You've been properly educated. We told you what the student-teacher relationship at the Dzogchen and Vajrayana level entail. I mean, this is heartbreaking because it means that everything that they've done that they say is a change is just a bloody whitewash. So the real change that they need to make in order to make their community safe is to get rid of this specific instruction for Vajrayana and Dzogchen and admit that whatever applies to the student-teacher relationship in an ordinary Buddhist context also must apply in the Vajrayana Dzogchen context. In other words, they've got to just see that this complete and utter slavery to your master is just not necessary. It's something, as His Holiness says, should not be stressed. We're not trying to change the teachings, we're just trying to leave behind the baggage from a feudal and abusive society. And I'm talking about an abusive lineage here because we now know, considering what Audrey Tobiel said in the Life and Times of Chokyi Lodro, that he in fact abused people in exactly the same way. It's not surprising, is it? His protege does the same thing. So there's a lineage of abuse there, and Rigpa needs to realise that that has to be left behind. Now they talk here about, in terms of their taking action, offering support, including via the restorative process and grievance councils. Now, I have not heard of anyone who's gone to the grievance council and has had any satisfaction. My personal experience of that is being completely ignored by the Rigpa Australia grievance person. And I went to the international grievance person, and what I was asking for was basically a full and complete apology, which, I'm still asking for. And I wanted to speak to someone in the vision board, and when we got to that point, nothing more happened, just nothing more happened. I did say I wouldn't be able to speak to them until they'd read Fallout. I have been told that some of them have actually read it, which is great, but nobody's said, all right, I'm now ready to talk to you. So much for the grievance process. It is a nice thing to say, but if it doesn't actually solve the problem, if it doesn't actually satisfy anyone, well, it's all a bit of a whitewash, isn't it? And the restorative process, well, it has stalled because we're still waiting for them to actually admit that, yes, Sogyal actually did commit crimes, quite a lot of them. And they also enabled it and covered it up. And let's hope that the aim still is there for this restorative process to go forward, because if they really do want that, then they're going to have to try again on this apology. Point number 3 in the actions they're taking is to share what we have learnt with the whole Buddhist community in the West so that such situations do not happen again. However, I hope that they don't actually share what they've learned until they've actually learnt something of value, because they haven't yet clarified their beliefs in a healthy way. If you have a look at part 2 of my book, Fallout, it goes quite deeply into the beliefs that are the problem, the beliefs that have been not fully understood. And I rely a lot on His Holiness's teachings, because let's face it, His Holiness is the real deal. I'm sure he's got faults and everything, but his teachings are impeccable. And if they're listening to Dzongsa Khyentse, he's just making the situation worse. He's just keeping on saying that abuse is okay in a Dzogchen Vajrayana context. So they haven't learned anything at all. Nothing important. And they're talking about making cultural changes. The cultural changes that they need to make are much deeper than what they have done. They have to recognise that that behaviour was not crazy wisdom. And that the whole idea of crazy wisdom, it's something we can just leave behind. It's just time it was dropped. Again, we're not trying to change anything. We're just allowing some things that are harmful to drop away. And it's obvious that they can't stay there because the lamas can't be trusted not to abuse that whole concept of crazy wisdom. If they were to have real, genuine cultural change of the kind that is required, they would be examining all the literature on cults and on cult dynamics, and on how structures within cults create situations where people feel that they can't say no. where people feel that they have to just simply accept what's dished out to them. Worse, where people's minds are twisted into a belief system that is actually dangerous and negative for them. Now, that is the real, genuine cultural change that needs to occur so that this teacher-student relationship is no longer one of master and slave, because that's what it is at the moment. They have to recognize where those cultural trappings of this old feudal society are no longer relevant in the West and can be allowed to just pass away as they should. And they need to recognize that that is not changing Vajrayana, that that is purely a cultural overlay from Tibet, and we don't need it here in the West. In fact, it's absolutely dangerous, as we've seen. So until they have the actual courage to look at it that deeply, well, we're just not getting there. So I'm just going to quote here a little bit from Sandra Paula's blog post about why she didn't accept the apology. She says here, restorative justice depends on a crime being acknowledged. I don't believe restorative justice can occur as long as Rigpa is unable to offer an apology that includes the word abuse. So what their apology needs to say is something like this. We admit that Sogyal abused people sexually, emotionally, psychologically, physically, financially, and spiritually. We now see that what he did was wrong. We are sorry that we enabled it and sorry that we covered it up. We will identify the people referred to in the Lewis-Silkin report as those who need to be removed from positions of power, and we will remove them from all positions of power, not just from management, because they have removed those three people that were mentioned in the report, Patrick Gaffney being the main one. They've removed them from the management roles and elevated to teacher status. So Patrick Gaffney now has more power. It's the complete opposite of what they actually should be doing. And they did say they were following the recommendations of the Lewis-Silkin report. I don't think that's following it. Not elevating him to a higher status, the main enabler, the main person who covered up. And there's a lot of others who enabled. They should be just stripped of any power at all, particularly teaching roles. Because what are they going to teach? They're going to teach exactly what they still believe, which is that it was crazy wisdom. There's a lot more work that Rigpa has to do just to make a proper apology, and then to actually make the kinds of changes that are needed to make sure that it doesn't happen again. I want to finish with a quote from an actual comment that was left on the blog post about this on the Rigpa website. This person says, I remain grateful for all the teachings I received from Sogyal Rinpoche and for all the people that made those teachings possible, but I feel profoundly disturbed that the good was mixed with terrible abuse, emotional, physical and sexual, perpetrated upon a large number of students. I read that because I think it speaks for a lot of us. And of course, then there are those who are not grateful for anything because they didn't receive teachings. All they received was abuse. So, Rigpa, all of these people who put together this renewed apology, thank you for your attempts. I think you have made a step forward. I suggest that you try again next time before you publish it. How about you run it by somebody in the What Now group, and then you could get it right next time. So that's all from me for today. I hope that you've found some value in this. I hope that the people in Rigpa who actually are working on this have the courage to listen to this. In actual fact, I do this because I still care. I do this because I want you to get it right. I do this to help you and to help everybody else to realise what needs to happen. Because it's only when us as a community recognise what needs to be happen and keep pushing for it that the actual change that is needed will occur. So thanks for watching, and I'll probably see you again sometime. Bye.